Come on, that is just, what a line. This poem is a work of art. Hi, welcome back to On Writing. If you're new here, my name is Megan and I'm a professional writer and writing coach. Today we are looking at the writing in one of my favorite poems called The Cremation of Sam McGee. This poem was written by Robert Service and published in 1907. He was a British-Canadian writer and spent a lot of time in the Yukon, which is the northern part of Canada. Why anyone would go there, I don't know, but it's also known as a place where they did a lot of mining for gold. Johnny Cash is reading this. Amazing.
There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men that toil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake Lebarge that I cremated Sam McGee.
Okay, so one thing I love about this poem is the rhyme scheme. I talk about this in my video on Annabelle Lee, but a way to figure out the rhyme scheme in a poem is to assign a letter to each ending sound. So you start with the first line. There are strange things done in the midnight sun. So sun or un, that's going to be our first sound, and we give that one an A. Then we see, does the next line rhyme with it? By the men who toil for gold. That does not rhyme with sun, so we give that a new letter, B. And you just go through the alphabet like that. The Arctic trails have their secret tales. That's different, so we give it a C. That would make your blood run cold. That rhymes with gold, so we give it the same letter, B. And you just go through the whole poem like that. This opening stanza is more like a prologue, I would say, and then once you get into the poem, the rhyme scheme is a bit more consistent. But anywho, what do we have going on? Strange things done in the midnight sun. Okay, so right off the bat, we're getting kind of an eerie vibe. What are the strange things that are done in the midnight sun? That is such a fun way of saying the moon. It's the sun that is out at midnight. It's the moon. By the men who moil for gold, moil just meaning toil or work hard. The Arctic trails have their secret tales. Again, secret, strange things done. We're just getting a little bit of eeriness, like what's going on here? And we also get personification in these lines. The Arctic trails have their secret tales. We're giving the Arctic trails human-like qualities by saying they have tales to tell. They don't have tales to tell because they're trails. Also a great double rhyme in the Arctic trails have their secret tales. It's such a nice rhythm that would make your blood run cold. Similarly, again, personification, the northern lights have seen queer sights. Queer just using its original meaning for strange or unusual, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake Lebarge, I cremated Sam McGee. So now we get a little bit of the story. This narrator cremated this guy named Sam. Why? Was there foul play afoot? We don't know yet. And then two other things I'll say. On the marge of Lake Lebarge, another double rhyme in that line, which is really nice. Lake Lebarge is actually a lake in the Yukon. I think it's actually Lake Lebarge, but here it's Lake Lebarge, so maybe they said it differently back then, or maybe he's just alluding to the lake, but I think that's kind of cool. On the marge, I think would refer to on the margin or on the side, beside the lake. So we've got our prologue down. Now what happens next?
Now Sam McGee was from Tennessee, where the cotton blooms and blows. Why he left his home in the south to roam round the pole, God only knows. He was always cold, but the land of gold seemed to hold him like a spell. Though he'd often say in his homely way, I'd sooner live in hell.
Man, this poem is well written. I love clever rhymes. I just really do. Wow, I'm sorry about this light. Can I film at times of day that aren't where it's not so sunny? I'm sorry. Let me just reposition us there. Okay. All right, now we're in the meat of the poem where we get the more consistent rhyme scheme that I talked about earlier. What I love about this poem is it has such a good rhythm. Sam McGee was from Tennessee, where the cotton blooms and blows. We get this nice rhythm and then it kind of punctuates at the end. Why he left his home in the south to roam round the pole, God only knows. It's beautiful, beautifully written. He was always cold, but the land of gold seemed to hold him like a spell. So we're learning about Sam here, obviously. He's not from Canada. He's from Tennessee, where it is distinctly warmer than it is in Canada. And we get that image there with cotton blooming and blowing versus being in the Arctic trails where there's nothing living except these men looking for gold. And even then, death is near. So Sam was always cold, but there was something about the Yukon that just held him. This almost like the land of gold. So this desire to find gold, to find his riches, that's what held him there. But we can see what that tension was like because he said he'd sooner live in hell. And that's kind of funny because hell is obviously stereotypically a lot warmer than we would think the Yukon would be. We get that Sam kind of has a little bit of humor. We can picture him talking with a southern accent, and this desire for gold is what is holding him in the Yukon.
On a Christmas day, we were mushing our way over the Dawson Trail, and you talk of your cold, through the parka's fold it stabbed like a driven nail. If our eyes we'd close, then the lashes froze, till sometimes we couldn't see. It wasn't much fun, but the only one to whimper was Sam McGee.
So they were mushing their way over the Dawson Trail on Christmas. Mushing just referring to using sled dogs. Through the parka's fold, it stabbed like a driven nail. Okay, this is so exciting. We get to talk about similes now. We just talk about metaphors all the time on this channel, and we never really talk about similes. Here's a perfect example of a simile. Through the parka's fold, it stabbed like a driven nail. So it being the cold stabbed through the parka's fold. Come on, that is just, what a line. This poem is a work of art because it says like, we know it's a simile. If it said as, it could also be a simile. If it said the cold was a driven nail through the parka's fold, then it would be a metaphor. That's the difference, if you're ever wondering. If our eyes we'd close, then the lashes froze till sometimes we couldn't see. I just love those midline rhymes. Oh man, so good. Have you ever been in a place where it is so cold that your eyelashes freeze? I have. It's great. Or when the wind makes your eyes water and then it gets in your eyelashes and they freeze. It's really pleasant. It's great. So it wasn't much fun, but the only one to whimper was Sam McGee. So we already know that he'd rather live in hell than be up here in the Yukon. It's so cold. He's from the south. He's from the warm climate. So this is hard for him to be here, but it's just got this grip on him. He's a big, strong Yukon gold digging man, but he's whimpering. So it's cutting through. Man. All right.
And that very night, as we lay packed tight in our robes beneath the snow, and the dogs were fed and the stars overhead were dancing heel and toe, he turned to me and, Cap, says he, I'll cash in this trip, I guess. And if I do, I'm asking that you won't refuse my last request.
So that very night, Christmas night, they lay packed tight under the snow. So you kind of bury yourself in the snow, which seems counterproductive, but it allows you to keep the warmth in. The dogs were fed, and the stars overhead were dancing heel and toe. So more personification and just a really kind of beautiful way of putting that. You just picture a blanket of stars above them. He turned to our narrator and he says, I'll cash in this trip, I guess. So this is likely a reference to the phrase cash in your chips, which became more common, I think, at the end of the 1800s, if not the early 1900s. And again, this was published in 1907. Instead of saying cash in his chips, he's saying, I'll cash in this trip. It also is a good tie-in to the fact that he's kind of gambling. They're all kind of gambling on this trip, hoping that they find gold. It is a gamble, so I think that's a perfect idiom to use. I'll cash in this trip, I guess. So he's sort of resigned. He's like, this is the end, I know it. He says, if I do cash it in, if I do die, I'm asking you won't refuse my last request.
Low that I couldn't say no. Then he says with a sort of a moan, it's the cursed cold, and it's got right hold till I'm chill clean through to the bone. Yet it ain't being dead, it's my awful dread of the icy grave that pains. So I want you to swear that, foul or fair, you'll cremate my last remains.
So he seemed so low is just another way of saying he was depressed or down, he was sad. And then he said with a moan, it's the cursed cold, and it's got right hold till I'm chilled clean through to the bone. The rhythm of this poem is like no other. I love it. So it's the cold that's got hold of him. And it reminds me of the line earlier when he said, but the land of gold seemed to hold him like a spell. And now it's the cursed cold that has taken hold of him. Instead of him being gripped by the idea of getting gold, he's now gripped by the cold, and that has superseded his desire to continue looking for gold. He knows that his game is up. So then what does he mean when he says, yet it ain't being dead, it's my awful dread of the icy grave that pains? So he's telling us basically, I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of an icy grave. He doesn't want to be buried underneath the snow. So he says, I want you to swear, no matter what, you'll cremate me. You'll cremate my last remains. That's where we get the impetus for that line in our prologue. Now we know what has caused our narrator to cremate Sam. Okay, here we go.
Well, a pal's last need is a thing to heed, so I swore I would not fail. And we started on at the break of dawn, but God, he looked ghastly pale. And he crouched on the sleigh, and he raved all day of his home in Tennessee. And before nightfall, a corpse was all that was left of Sam McGee.
So he died. A pal's last need is a thing to heed. That is so good. Oh, put that on a pillow. In other words, saying, I can't ignore your last request, your final wishes before you die. So we see Sam starting to deteriorate even more here. He looked ghastly pale. Again, we get that eerie language. And before nightfall, a corpse was all that was left of Sam McGee. So he died.
With a corpse half hid that I couldn't get rid, I hurried horror-driven. There wasn't a breath in that land of death. And because of a promise given, it was lashed to the sleigh, and it seemed to say, you may tax your brawn and brains, but you promised true, and it's up to you to cremate my last remains.
Okay, this version is a little bit different than the version I'm reading on Poetry Foundation, but there wasn't a breath in that land of death, and I hurried horror-driven with a corpse half hid that I couldn't get rid because of a promise given. It is so well written. Well done, Robert Service. Well done. So there wasn't a breath in that land of death. The way he describes the Yukon it just puts you right there. Oh man, how did people do that back then? How do people do that now? How did I do that? I lived in Canada. With a corpse half hid. So I'm wondering, do the other people know that he's still carrying the corpse? Maybe it was just him and Sam. Is there anybody else with them? I don't know. It's half hidden, so he can probably still see it. And he's horror driven. Like, he's carrying around this corpse. It's probably nasty, and he's probably really creeped out by that. So, and then he says, it seems to say, you may tax your brawn and brains. So your brawn being your physical strength, and your brains obviously referring to your mental capacity. He's on the sleigh with this corpse, and he's picturing it kind of talking to him like this. It seems like it's saying, you can't bury me, you can't let me go, not until you do what you promised. All right.
Now, a promise made is a debt unpaid, and the trail has its own stern code. In the days to come, though my lips were numb, in my heart how I cursed that load. In the long, long night by the lone firelight, while the huskies round in a ring howled out their woes to the homeless snows, oh God, how I loathed that thing.
So here we get him continuing on in the story. A promise made is a debt unpaid. That's another great line. So if you make someone a promise, that's a debt you owe them. And until you fulfill it, it's unpaid. And the trail has its own stern code. So we get another instance of personification. And this idea that when you're out on the Yukon together and you've been through this, like, there's a code you abide by. You don't just ignore a man's last wishes. Then we get time is moving on. He says, in the days to come. So that's a good transition line. Though his lips were numb, right? Are we getting that it's freezing? In his heart, how he cursed the load. So even though it was too cold to speak, he was still cursing it in his heart. I think that's well written. In the long, long night by the lone firelight. And so he loathed the thing. He loathed the corpse. I mean, think about it this way. How is he going to cremate a whole body in the Yukon? How is he going to do that? He's just going to have to carry around this body for days and days like he's doing, because how is he going to where's he going to cremate that? It's starting to take its toll on him as well.
And every day that quiet clay seemed to heavy and heavier grow.
He says, every day that quiet clay seemed to heavy and heavier grow. On I went, though the dogs were spent and the grub was getting low. So what's he saying? The dogs are spent, they're tired, they've been running for days. The grub was getting low, he was running out of food. The trail was bad, and I felt half mad. So he was starting to lose it. But he swore he would not give in. And he'd often sing to the hateful thing, and it hearkened with a grin. So what I really like about this poem is I feel like it gets at the idea of what it's like to be alone in the Arctic frozen tundra, and you start to kind of lose it. You're going half mad, it's freezing, your food is running out, you haven't seen the sun in days, and you're just trying to keep going, but even even now your mind starts to maybe play tricks on you, and we see that happening a little bit here. It seems like the corpse is talking to him. It harkens with a grin, so it's kind of teasing him in a sense. This part of the poem reminds me a little bit of Jack London's story To Build a Fire, which is really great if you haven't read it. It has the same feel of being in the freezing cold and just trying to persist and survive.
Till I came to the marge of Lake Lebarge, and a derelict there lay. It was jammed in the ice, but I saw in a thrice it was called the Alice May. And I looked at it, and I thought a bit, and I looked at my frozen chum. Then here, said I, with a sudden cry, is my crematorium.
So now we get to the point of the story where he's referring back to what we heard in the prologue, where he said, on the marge of Lake Lebarge, I cremated Sam McGee. So now we are at the marge of Lake Lebarge, and he sees a derelict there. So he sees a ship called the Alice May. It's wrecked. It's jammed in the ice. He looked at the ship. He looked at Sam. And then he's like, okay, well, I found the place where I'm going to cremate him.
Planks I tore from the cabin floor, and I lit the boiler fire. Some coal I found that was lying round, and I heaped the fuel higher. Flames just soared, and the furnace roared, such a blaze you never did see. And I burrowed a hole in the glowing coal, and I stuffed in Sam McGee.
My gosh. Okay, so one thing you can think about if you're writing poems is you can play around with the structure of your lines. You don't always have to say things in the same order you would say them in a short story or a novel. So for instance, some planks I tore from the cabin floor. He doesn't say, I tore some planks from the cabin floor, because that ruins the rhythm and it misses the rhyme. Some planks I tore from the cabin floor. You're placing your emphasis on the same sound, which is what makes the rhythm so nice. So as you're writing poems, if you're like, man, I just can't figure out this line is so weird, it doesn't work, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, try mixing around the structure of your line and see if that helps. Try playing around with how you're saying what you're saying. Okay, so he builds a fire in this ship, he burrows a hole in the glowing coal and stuffs in Sam McGee. Good grief. Okay, and then this poem is long, so let's just skip ahead. So then he walks away because he doesn't want to hear him sizzle. Oh, that's very pleasant, but understandable. Yeah, I wouldn't want to hear that either. The heavens scowled and the huskies howled and the wind began to blow. So there's almost a sense of disapproval by nature. The heavens are scowling, the huskies are howling, like it's this mournful, disapproving almost feel. Maybe they're disapproving of the cremation, or maybe they're disapproving that the fact that Sam died. I don't know, but there's a sense of like there's a reaction of nature to this decision, this action. So it was icy cold, but the hot sweat rolled down my cheeks, and I don't know why. The greasy smoke in an inky cloak went streaking down the sky. Oh man, every single line in this poem is so good. So it's icy cold, but he's sweating. He's sweating because he's done something that is, it's kind of horrific. If you have to throw your friend's corpse into a fire, that's gonna stick with you for some time. You know what I'm saying? And then the greasy smoke, nasty. In an inky cloak went streaking down the sky. So we get this incredible word picture that paints that puts us right there where we don't want to be, which is in this scene. Okay.
I do not know how long in the snow I wrestle with grisly fear, but the stars came out and they danced about before I ventured near. I was sick with dread, but I bravely said, I'll just take a peek inside. I guess he's cooked, and it's time I looked. Then the door I opened wide.
So he's out in the snow, he's sweating, he's afraid, and then we get the same picture we had earlier of the stars coming out at night and they're dancing, which I think is cool that he pulled that detail back in. They danced about again as he ventured closer to the ship. He was sick with dread, he was full of fear, he's sweating, but he said, I'm gonna look inside to see if, the deed is done. And then what does he see when he opens the door?
And there sat Sam, looking cool and calm, in the heart of the furnace roar. And he wore a smile, you could see a mile, and he said, please close that door. It's fine in here, but I greatly fear you'll let in the cold and storm. And since I left Plum Tree down in Tennessee, this is the first time I've been warm.
So he opens the door to the furnace and he sees Sam sitting there, and Sam smiles, and says, please close the door, you're gonna let in the cold. Just infusing a little bit of humor here, but also, again, getting us to question the narrator's sanity. Is he hallucinating? Is this what really happened? Is it just a poetic device? We don't know, and that's kind of part of the fun of the poem, but it does reverse what you expect to have happen. So as I say in a few of my other videos, if you want to make your story really great, always put a reversal in. Reverse your expectations, reverse your reader's expectations, and give them something they're not quite expecting, which is what we get at the end of this poem. And then how does it finish up?
There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men that toil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake Lebarge that I cremated Sam McGee.
So he repeats that prologue stanza at the end, and what's the point of doing that? When we first read that prologue, that same stanza, we were like, okay, this is mysterious. There are strange things done. What does that mean? The Arctic trails have their secret tales. There's all this mystery. And now when we hear it again, it takes on a completely different meaning because we know the story. We know what he's referencing. That's a great way to have impact at the end of your story or poem. By repeating that phrase, it kind of sums up and sort of lets the story sink in again. So that's the Cremation of Sam McGee. Let me know if you've heard that poem before. I really don't hear it talked about very often, but I love it. It's one of my favorites, mostly because the rhythm is so good. Honestly, it's a great poem to look at if you're interested in writing poems that rhyme and playing around with sentence structure and those mid-line rhymes. Oh, don't even get me started. If I could just write 2 lines like that, I'd be happy. Anyway, if you have a poem you'd like us to look at together, let me know. And as always, thanks so much for watching. I will see you next time. Happy writing.